Welcome to Global Money Talk, brought to you by SamProTV. Greetings to all of our viewers from across the United States, Korea, and around the world. We're coming to you live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in New York City, the financial capital of America. I'm Remy Blair, and as we kick off a new trading week, I'm joined by Tai Wong, independent proprietary trader. Tai, happy Monday. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning. Great to be here. A nice kind of a balmy day. I think it's going to rain a little bit later, but I'm going to enjoy the warmth for a little bit. Big day today, and I noticed that you're wearing sort of orange, and I'm wearing orange and blue. Because today, I'm going to actually call it Juan Soto Day. Overnight, Juan Soto, the slugger for the Yankees, just signed with the crosstown rival Mets for a 15-year deal for $765 million. Apparently, there's even a kicker that will kick even higher if he doesn't opt out or something. That's pretty amazing. I mean, this is a generational hitter. He's just turned 26, so he's just entering his physical prime. But my word, that's $300,000 a game. If you have 4 at-bats a game, it's $80,000 every time he comes to the plate. So, congratulations to Juan Soto. I think certainly Steve Cohen, who's a big hedge fund guy, has more money than actually the Yankees. So I think his view was, I'm going to get this guy no matter what, and he got him. And I think it'll work out pretty well for him. And now, if the Yankees are smart, they're going to take the $50 million a year they didn't spend and maybe get a couple of pitchers, get a couple of hitters. I think they ought to spend that money, but you're not so invested in just one guy. But pretty amazing. Yeah, pretty amazing, and quite a sum that we're talking about here when it comes to salary. And it's, I'm sure as a Yankees fan, you wearing orange as well as blue, did that take some doing this morning, or not so much? I mean, it just sort of it felt kind of right. But yeah, as a Yankees fan, I'm kind of happy for the Mets. I think there was once upon a time where there was a big crosstown rivalry that was a little angry. I don't think that's been there for a long time. I'm just glad that the Boston Red Sox didn't get him. I think that would have stung a little bit. So I think the New York Yankees fans are probably a little upset, but not furious as if he had gone to the Boston Red Sox. But congratulations to Juan Soto. I would also like to mention it's Dame Judi Dench's birthday. Happy 90th birthday to M of the James Bond series. That's amazing that she has turned 90 years old today. Happy birthday. She seems sort of ageless, right? Yeah, absolutely. Pretty remarkable. Well, as we kick off today's trading session, why don't we take a look at where the markets are trading? Because last Friday, we saw the Dow, NASDAQ, S&P 500 close mixed after that employment report, but the S&P 500 and NASDAQ, yet another record high. Right. But let's see where we're trading this morning. We started off on a mixed note, but right now we're seeing the Dow lower by over about a quarter of a percentage point, or over 100 points. We're seeing the NASDAQ down by about 0.6% on the session after hitting a new record high in the previous session, and the S&P 500 holding above that 6,050 level and down by just half a percentage point. But there are a lot of headlines to cover this morning, so let's get straight into it, including opposition forces that took over Damascus in Syria over the weekend. So geopolitics front and center as we kick off the trading week. Well, this was really interesting, and it's been said before, but it is a great quote. Last week was a period in which decades happened in a week. Mm-hmm. The Assad regime, so Bashar's father, Hafez al-Assad, had been in power since I think 1971 or so. So basically, this is a dynasty that's lasted half a century, and it collapsed inside of 2 weeks. The rebels took the northern city of Aleppo, and then the cities just started to collapse. And it was almost like at the end, like in a way, like Afghanistan, which the American-supported government just really started to collapse, and it probably even took a little more time because the Americans were still busy withdrawing, and one of really one of those terrible withdrawals from a place that we had been. But this is really fascinating because the people who took over, the guy was former formerly associated with Al-Qaeda. There's a bounty, the Americans have a bounty with him, although apparently the Americans have left the bounty on, but have not actively pursued him. So it really is unclear where he stands. What is interesting is we don't know, first of all, if that government is going to be stable in Syria. So do you have some kind of power vacuum? Observers are saying that this hurts Iran because Syria was propped up by Iran for a long time, and you look at the Iranian sort of satellites in the area. Hamas has been decimated. Hezbollah been seriously hampered. Now Assad is gone, so all their client states are a little, were really sort of disappeared. And the reason also that Assad fell was Russia, which has also supported his father as well as his regime, busy occupied in Ukraine. And what's interesting is geopolitically, and I don't know if any of this is actually tradable at this stage. I don't think it is, but it's worth keeping an eye on because the Russians have had a port in a city named Tartus for the 50 years, and all their ships left because I guess they were uncertain what the outcome was going to be, and they might not be too popular because they supported Assad for so long, so the rebels might not like them. But this is their last warm water port in Europe. Everything else is really unusable for them. So, all their ports are now either in the Baltic or Murmansk in the north. So this is substantially painful for Russia as well. They've spent a lot of blood and treasure supporting Assad. Now, where do we go from here? The Israelis have occupied a part of the buffer zone near the Golan Heights because they said, you know what, if there's a vacuum, we don't want anybody, we don't like filling it, so we'll fill it for now. Believe they've hit certain chemical weapons depots. There's no oil really in Syria, and it's one of those countries in the Middle East where it was part of the Ottoman Empire, which ended after World War I, and the British and the French sort of split them up into sort of almost arbitrary countries where instead of ethnically separated, which may have made more stable countries. But nevertheless, we have a power vacuum in one of the important countries in the Middle East. One of the reasons why gold, I think, is up 1% and change overnight. I mean, we'll talk about China in a little bit, but it remains to be seen what happens now.
Yeah, I think that's the big question mark because, as you mentioned, with this power vacuum in place, there's a lot of uncertainty. And it's interesting when we talk about geopolitics because with so many different nation states getting involved, it's also politics involved, isn't it?
Right, right. The U.S. really doesn't want to be involved. Russia probably wants to keep their hands in there, but they're a little bit busy right now. And I don't know if there's any. China hasn't really been involved in the Middle East very much, but it is really a crossroads of a lot of business, a lot of people, a lot of oil, though not Syria specifically. So that area of the world, is volatile, has been volatile, is volatile, and will continue to be so. But on the face of it, he was a brutal dictator, killed an awful lot of people. I don't think anybody is going to be weeping at his removal, except perhaps the people who supported him and the Alawite minority, which was the sort of the power base of the Assad regime. Sort of a kind of a bad actor. People are glad to see that he's gone, but does this mean that we eventually have a workable country in the Middle East, or will there be hundreds of thousands of more refugees leaving? It's a little hard to say. Iraq became a big problem. Towards the after the U.S. left, and ISIS came in. So let's hope nothing like that happens. So it bears watching.
Yeah, and indeed, when we're talking about the markets in conjunction with what's happening around the globe, there are some regions of the world that have been unstable, not just in the previous century, the 20th century, but when we look back on history, as you mentioned, you brought up the Ottoman Empire. There are just some regions of the world that have experienced volatility as well as political strife throughout these centuries. So, something to keep our eyes on for sure.
You're exactly right. I mean, that area of the world, because I think it was such a crossroads. I mean, near the ancestral homeland of the Jews and many empires, the Babylonians, the Hittites, the Persians, and then eventually the Ottomans. So thousands of years of pretty pretty serious activity that's probably not going to change.
And when we're looking at the market reaction to what's happening in terms of geopolitics, and we didn't see that much price movement in terms of oil, as you mentioned, we saw WTI as well as Brent higher by 1%, but still maintaining their current ranges. And when it comes to gold, though, we have been seeing a little bit of movement here. And I know that you want to talk about China's central bank resuming buying gold last month of November. So tell us what you think is happening.
So, well, it was really interesting, a little bit of a shock, and I think gold is reacting higher to this. And I'm glad it did, because if gold didn't react higher to this, it might be a little problematic. But let's look at graphic 1, and this is from the World Gold Council that shows the central banks that have bought and sold gold through the end of October. So this doesn't include the Chinese purchases. And you can see that India, Turkey, and Poland have been by far the biggest buyers this year, somewhere between 60 and 80 metric tons. And 1 metric ton is 32,000 odd ounces. China stopped buying around the April-ish region, around when gold was 2,300. And you can see that a lot more buyers and sellers. Philippines were one of the bigger sellers. But China buying now, last month, when we're at $2,700, suggests that they've decided that we want to add to their reserves. And they bought something like 160,000 ounces, 5 tons. It's not an immense amount, but sort of the idea it gives to the markets is China really helped drive this rally from the lows a couple of years ago, that the Chinese are in buying. All of a sudden, they're not worried that the prices are too high. So does this give gold a new leg up to challenge new highs? We're a little bit away from that right now. The highs, all-time highs, were 27.90. I think we're at 26.60 or thereabouts. But it's important for gold, and gold has been, after a big year and a lot of momentum, it's really lost sort of interest, and I would have been worried if gold didn't rally on the back of China buying gold again. So let's see where this goes. I think the market would like to see it certainly back above 2,700 to feel that the bull might be sort of driving things again. On the subject of China and gold, maybe a couple of weeks ago, there was a big story that came out in the markets that there was a big, huge gold find in China, in Hunan province, and it was something like 1,000 tons of gold. And you think about that, and you're like, that's actually not that big, and apparently it's pretty far down in the ground. And John Reed, whom I know was a strategist at UBS, I worked with him, one of the best sort of voices in gold, came out and said it's so deep, very hard to develop, and you're talking, even if they do develop it, and it is as big as they say, you're talking about a mine that will produce a million ounces of gold in, when it hits its peak, which might be something like 15 or 20 years. We dig well over 100 million ounces out of the ground every year in gold. So it's a nice story, but it's really not going to heavily impact the gold market. Although you could see the Chinese government saying, well, maybe we don't need to buy gold outside, we'll just buy gold from one of our internal customers. But it shouldn't be really, really market changing. But nevertheless, gold is higher. Part of it is Middle East tensions, but I think part of it is actually China buying again.
And as you mentioned, Tai, year to date, gold does remain higher by about 28%, and since hitting highs on Halloween on October 31st, it is still lower. But this is something to definitely keep our eyes on. We've talked about the cost effectiveness of actually mining for gold, what it means for gold company stocks here in the U.S. that are listed here. But at the same time, with China buying again, the PBOC buying again, it is a story that we'll continue to keep our eyes on, especially with gold at elevated levels.
Certainly.
And as we continue to monitor China, I think this is a good time to talk about TikTok's potential ban here in the U.S. But a lot of moving parts here. So what do you think will actually happen?
Well, so this is pretty interesting. A three-judge appellate panel turned down their appeal against the ban last week. So what that means is in April, President Biden signed a broadly bipartisan-backed bill that became law that said you have to sell it within 9 months to a non-Chinese entity, or we'll shut you down. Those 9 months, it's January 19th, 2025.
Interesting timing.
Day before the inauguration. So now what TikTok has asked for today is the court to say, you know what, you've ruled this way, but can you just put an injunction and let the Supreme Court review it? Because if you shut us down, it'll do a lot of damage. It'll be terrible against free speech. It'll do a lot of damage, and a lot of Americans who make their living on TikTok are going to be, going to be damaged quite substantially. So that is probably all true. Whether the court will grant the injunction is unclear, and whether the Supreme Court will even take the case is unclear. The Supreme Court can choose to say, no, we don't want to take the case, and then the lower court rules, and TikTok will be probably effectively shut down the day before the inauguration. What also complicates this is Donald Trump, when he was first president, wanted to shut it down, but during the campaign he said, no, let's not shut it down because it'll make Meta stronger, and Meta was mean to me. Well, they banned them for 2 years, and now Mark Zuckerberg, of course, went to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring. So it's unclear what a new administration would do, but it is a law. So it's not as if Donald Trump can really rescind the law. Maybe he could do an executive order to slow it down. But right now, it looks a little bleak for TikTok, pending whether or not the Supreme Court will review the case. And the Supreme Court typically will only will take cases, and they'll rule on them, but the big rulings don't come down till June, and they've got a lot of things on their plate. How important they think this is will be interesting, but if the Supreme Court doesn't take it up or has a delay, that ban will go into effect on January 19th, 2025.
Yeah, and Tai, it's interesting you mentioned Meta, because there are expectations that if this ban does go into effect, this could drive users to Meta. And as you mentioned, Donald Trump has been getting many visitors down in Mar-a-Lago in Florida, including Mark Zuckerberg.
Pretty amazing. Everyone's lining. I mean, Joe and Mika from Morning Joe. That was a little bit of a shock. They went to kiss the ring. So maybe. It's unclear what they say. I think they want to make sure Trump is not angry when he thinks about them. So the Department of Justice is perhaps a little less. The new Department of Justice, I should say, is going to be a little less forceful. Trying to go after enforcement actions or anything like that, or even anti-competitive actions. It could be all different agencies. You just want to get on the man's good side. That's what they're doing. But it doesn't really look good for TikTok. And you wonder if this investigation of NVIDIA, that the Chinese said an anti-monopoly law that caused NVIDIA to be down 3% today, is in fact something related to, you hit our companies, we'll hit your companies, although, I don't know how much NVIDIA, will be hurt substantially by, a ban in China. I would like to think, it's a big business, sort of a big business partner, but I don't know if it's that big for its newest chips. I don't even know if they're allowed to sell the newest chips to China. But certainly when a big player like China wants to investigate you, it's a concern, and you're seeing it reflected a little bit in the stock price.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned NVIDIA, because it is weighing on the Dow, the biggest laggard on the Dow Industrial Average today, down by nearly 3.5% as we head into the noon hour. But this is something to keep our eyes on, because whether we're talking about tariffs or different potential actions by either China or the U.S., we're talking about so many different sectors and different moving parts, and in reality, there's still uncertainty about what will actually transpire.
Right. Exactly. Right now, I sort of think of it as maybe two fencers, and they're just probing each other right now, not really committing to an attack. You see it. My kids fence, and I've watched a lot of fencing, and you're probing. You're seeing how the other side reacts, and that's the sense that you get right now. Before the inauguration, before things may actually get rolling. But what is actually remarkable, and partly it's because of Trump, and it's because Trump is. Formerly a president, is he's getting invited to, he was at the event for the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral. And I'm actually personally, I would love to see that. I saw the old one. Apparently, Trump said it used to be all dark and gloomy inside. Now it's all cleaned up and beautiful, and it makes me think of maybe the new inside is sort of like Grand Central after they clean it up, which is quite remarkable. But Trump, certainly they're probably treating him as more the president than than the current lame duck president. Which is very unusual to see.
And the seating arrangement at that reopening ceremony was interesting as well, wasn't it? Because he was just seats away from Joe Biden.
And he had, he said, well, we had a wonderful chat and, all the stuff, nasty things. But then it's just politics and, sort of a way, I guess Trump reminds me of somebody you always want to keep on your good side, and you want to make sure that you had the last good word with him, because that's what he might think of. Oh yeah, Joe Biden, she was nice to me, and forget the rest of what was going on. So this is the new sort of managed Trump sort of strategies. I'm sure that everybody is working on, and manage him as well as his advisors.
And apparently after his visit, Trump's visit to France, to the ceremony, the reopening ceremony of Notre Dame, he is heading to the Middle East and will be present at a Bitcoin conference in Abu Dhabi. So that'll be interesting to see what he says and what implications there are for crypto this week.
Well, I remember when he was president the first time, you always had, literally, I actually had Twitter on because you actually had to see what he said, because most of Wall Street, a lot of the banks wouldn't allow social media platforms, right? But it got to the point where if you didn't see that, the market would start to move and you wouldn't see what it was. And Bloomberg eventually cleverly allowed you to sort of stream through sort of Twitter headlines. So I guess in this new term, the traders will have to keep an eye on Twitter. More importantly, perhaps keep an eye on Truth Social all the time, because you don't want the markets to start moving and you don't know why.
Well, that really speaks to how times have changed in terms of what we're paying attention to, and having access to social media, because it does have the potential to really affect market action, especially when we're talking about crypto.
Yes. Yeah, he's a big crypto fan, and you could say, a few positive blurbs will probably get Bitcoin well above 100,000, and a few negative comments might, sink the crypto sector, at least temporarily. So, that's what you get with Trump. You get the volatility.
And while we're continuing our trip around the globe, why don't we go to Asia? So last week we were focused on what was happening in South Korea, but apparently Japan is experimenting with a 4-day work week. And initially when I saw this headline, I thought of Tim Ferriss's old book, The 4-Hour Work Week.
Oh.
Do you remember that book?
I don't actually. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, but there is a lot of interesting sentiment when it comes to the traditional work week, right? Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And I think during the pandemic, a lot of new terms popped up, whether it was quiet quitting or quiet hiring. And it really does speak to how the attitude towards work has changed. But when it comes to Japan, what do you make of this announcement?
Well, it's a little bit of a surprise, because you always think of, sort of Asians as, really hardworking. And it's okay we say that, because we won't be blamed for some terrible, that was so racist or anything like that. But we're very hardworking. As a matter of fact, school children in Hong Kong and maybe even in Japan used to go to school on Saturday mornings. And I think some offices even worked on Saturday mornings. So for Japan, which is a well-built reputation of really good, well-educated workers who work really hard, who come up with amazing quality products, right? You hear a lot of things about Japan. You never hear that Japan's products are crap. They're amazing. I drive a Toyota truck. It's got 188,000 miles on it.
That's good.
So right, it's amazing. I'm never getting rid of that thing. But the Tokyo Metropolitan Authority said, in an effort to try to get people to have more children, I guess moving down to a 4-day work week, and for certain people who have children to take care of, they might even shorten the working day by a couple of hours. And this is a move to say, we're really, the average age in, I think I saw a stat in of the population in Japan is close to 50, while we're just under 50, while the U.S. is just under 40, and that's really, really big because the total fertility rate is 1.2. So ideally, to replace your population, you need 2.1. So every 2 adults need to have slightly more than 2 kids on a statistical basis, naturally. But at 1.2, that is so far below that the fear is Japan could be down to 80 million people by the end of the century, substantially lower than where they are today. So this is a try to do that. Now, whether it will be successful, whether it sets an example and other sectors decide to go to a 4-day work week is unclear. But while we're in Asia and while we're talking about Japan, other things interesting things happened in China over the weekend, not just related to TikTok, is their inflation figures came out, and their producer price index dropped for the 26th month in a row. Now, it's less of a drop than what the market had forecasted, but nevertheless still another drop. And the consumer price index were both under consensus, in part because food, which had driven up their CPI, is now backing off. So essentially, the economy is still struggling. And what was interesting is the Politburo met and what came out over the weekend was they said the market was looking at very, very positive things. They moved their monetary policy stance to what they call moderately loose. The only time they've been moderately loose since 1993, when the economy really started going, was just after the global financial crisis, where they took out the bazooka and really pushed stimulus and worked really well for the Chinese economy. Now, they don't really want to do that again, but they have said that indicated in their communique that they're ready to break not directly, but ready to break the 3% fiscal limit, deficit limit that they have set for themselves. And their top goal is now actually boosting consumption. So this is what the market needs, what the market wants to hear. We didn't see very much reaction overnight in the Chinese indices. That might be due to the fact that some of these might have come out after the stories might have filled out after the markets had started to close. So we'll have to see over the next few days how the Chinese markets react to this. When we had that big, huge spike in September and early October, when they said they cut rates, they were going to stimulate the economy, and then it's really been very quiet because the market said, that's great, but what are you going to show us? It may take some time to come out. This may, if the market really believes it, we'll see that in the Chinese benchmark indices. And they really do need it. It's the same problem with Japan, where they're probably maybe 20 or 30 years behind, but the fertility rate is really low. The growth engines of the economy have been stalled. Will they get them going again remains unclear.
Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that, because we've been hearing about youth unemployment in China, and when we think about other economies and how the majority of, say, India's population is younger, and when we look at fertility rates across developed nations, we know that the birth rate is falling across the world, and I think there are a lot of different moving parts here when it comes to why. But as we head into the rest of today, we'll be keeping an eye this week on a handful of earnings, and it's hard to believe, but next week, Tai, will be the final full trading week of the year, and we get that Fed meeting coming up next week. So this week's inflation figures in the U.S. are something we'll be paying close attention to, and you and I will be back here on Wednesday to dissect those CPI figures.
Yes. The last two figures before, the last two big inflation figures before the Fed meets next week. It's 90-10 right now. The market is really settled on 25 basis points. I don't think that's really going to change. CPI and PPI usually don't surprise in a dramatic way, certainly not PPI. Well, if you get a couple of higher than expected readings, I think they're still going to still going to cut 25 basis points, we'll want to look at the dot plot and then see what they forecast for 2025, and that's subject to change because we have a new administration coming in and there's a lot of uncertainty.
Well, Tai, as always, great to cover what's happening in the markets as we kick off a new trading week. So thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be here.
Thank you. And that will do it for Global Money Talk live from the New York Stock Exchange. We're so excited to bring you daily coverage here on Sampro TV. You can check out the show anytime on our YouTube channel by searching Global Money Talk. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back here tomorrow. Have a great day.